In the glittering halls of the Habsburg Empire, where bloodlines determined destiny and tradition crushed individuality, one man dared to live by his own rules. His name was Archduke Ludwig Salvator of Austria, and by the time of his death in 1915, he had become the empire's most scandalous secret. Historical records reveal a prince who rejected every expectation placed upon him: marriage, military service, and the rigid moral codes that bound his royal family. Instead, according to contemporary accounts, he chose a path that would make him both fascinating and forbidden. The whispers began early in his adult life. Court documents from the 1870s describe Ludwig as eccentric and unsuitable for marriage, though the reasons remained diplomatically vague. What historians now understand is that Ludwig Salvator was living what many scholars believe to be an openly homosexual life in an era when such existence could destroy empires. Unlike other royal scandals that were quickly covered up, Ludwig's story stretched across decades of defiance, exile, and ultimately a mysterious retreat from the world that had rejected him. The Habsburg dynasty had weathered many political storms, but Ludwig Salvator presented a different kind of threat. He wasn't plotting revolution or challenging political power. He was simply refusing to be the prince they demanded he become. Court observers noted his complete disinterest in potential brides and his preference for the company of young men, though such observations were carefully coded in the language of the time. If you're intrigued by royal secrets that were buried for over a century, make sure to subscribe, because this story gets much darker and much more shocking than the history books ever dared to reveal. What made Ludwig's case particularly dangerous for the monarchy was not just his personal choices, but his apparent comfort with them. While other royals hid their unconventional desires behind carefully arranged marriages and discreet affairs, Ludwig seemed determined to live authentically. Historical correspondence suggests his family grew increasingly desperate to find a solution to what they saw as the Ludwig problem. His mother, Archduchess Maria Antonia, reportedly wrote anxious letters about her son's future, though the specific content remains diplomatically obscured in palace archives. By 1872, when Ludwig was 25 and still unmarried, the situation had become critical. The empire needed heirs, alliances, and respectability. What they had instead was a prince who, according to contemporary gossip columns, was more interested in literature, travel, and the company of his male companions than in fulfilling his dynastic duties. Some historians argue that his behavior was merely artistic temperament, but the pattern of evidence suggests something far more revolutionary for its time. The breaking point would come not from any single scandal, but from Ludwig's ultimate decision to abandon court life entirely. By 1878, he would make a choice that would shock the imperial family and create one of the most intriguing royal mysteries of the 19th century. But first, he would have to survive a childhood that seemed designed to crush everything that made him different. Let me adjust topic 2 to meet the exact word requirements. Archduke Ludwig Salvator entered the world on August 4, 1847, in the magnificent Pitti Palace of Florence. Born into a family tree that demanded absolute conformity. His father, Leopold II, was the Grand Duke of Tuscany, and his mother, Maria Antonia, was a princess of the Two Sicilies. From his first breath, Ludwig was surrounded by the suffocating protocol that governed every moment of royal existence. Yet historical accounts suggest that even as a child, something about him refused to bend to imperial expectations. The early signs were subtle but persistent. Palace tutors' reports, preserved in the Habsburg family archives, describe a boy who was brilliant but unpredictable. While his siblings dutifully absorbed lessons in statecraft and military strategy, Ludwig showed an unusual fascination with botany, languages, and what court observers diplomatically termed unconventional interests. By age 10, according to his tutor's correspondence, he had mastered several languages and displayed an almost obsessive interest in documenting the natural world around him. His notebooks, filled with detailed botanical drawings, suggested a mind that preferred nature's chaos to court order. His childhood was abruptly shattered in 1859, when political upheaval forced the family to flee Tuscany. Leopold II lost his throne to the forces of Italian unification, and the family found refuge in Austria, where Ludwig would spend his formative years under the watchful eye of the imperial court. Historical records indicate that this displacement marked a turning point in the young prince's development. Court chroniclers noted that he became increasingly withdrawn from formal court activities while developing what they described as intense friendships with other boys. The Habsburg court had specific expectations for its young princes. Military training was not optional. It was essential for maintaining the empire's strength. Yet Ludwig, according to military academy records, showed little enthusiasm for the traditional arts of war. Instead, instructors reported that he spent his time writing detailed observations about landscapes and collecting botanical specimens. Some historians interpret this behavior as early signs of the nonconformist path he would later choose. What worried his family most, according to surviving correspondence between his parents, was Ludwig's apparent disinterest in the company of appropriate young ladies. Social events that were meant to introduce him to potential future wives became, in the words of one court observer, exercises in polite avoidance. Instead, Ludwig gravitated towards scholars, artists, and what contemporary accounts describe as inappropriate companions for a prince of his station. His preference for intellectual discourse over courtly romance alarmed relatives who understood that marriage alliances were the cornerstone of dynastic power. By his late teens, the whispers had begun in earnest throughout the imperial court. Court gossip, preserved in diplomatic correspondence from the period, suggests that Ludwig's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore or excuse. His mother's letters to various relatives, discovered in family archives decades later, reveal growing concern about her son's peculiar temperament and his refusal to show interest in marriage negotiations that had begun when he was barely 20. The family's desperation would soon drive them to increasingly extreme measures to force Ludwig into conventional royal behavior. They would arrange introduction after introduction, hoping to spark some interest in dynasty and duty. But what they didn't understand was that Ludwig Salvator was already planning his escape from everything they represented. By 1870, the Habsburg family's patience with Ludwig Salvator was wearing dangerously thin. At 23, he was well past the age when most princes had secured advantageous marriages and begun producing heirs. The imperial court understood that marriage was not about love. It was about alliances, bloodlines, and the survival of dynasties. Yet Ludwig remained stubbornly, mysteriously uncooperative with every attempt to secure his matrimonial future. The pressure began subtly. According to court records, his mother, Maria Antonia, arranged carefully orchestrated social events where Ludwig would be introduced to eligible princesses from across Europe. Historical accounts describe these gatherings as elaborate productions, with young women displayed like diplomatic chess pieces. Princess after princess was paraded before him, each representing potential political alliances that could strengthen Habsburg influence. Yet witnesses noted that Ludwig seemed to treat these encounters as tedious obligations rather than romantic opportunities. Documents from the period reveal the growing desperation of his family. Letters between relatives, discovered in various European archives, show increasing concern about what they diplomatically termed Ludwig's reluctance to settle. Some historians suggest that his family initially attributed his behavior to artistic temperament or scholarly distraction. They arranged meetings with princesses who shared his interest in botany and natural sciences, hoping intellectual compatibility might spark romantic interest. The turning point came around 1872, when Ludwig was presented with what courtiers considered an ideal match. Though specific details remain diplomatically obscured in official records, contemporary accounts suggest that a particularly advantageous marriage proposal was arranged, one that would have significantly strengthened Austria's position in European politics. According to court gossip preserved in diplomatic correspondence, Ludwig's rejection was not merely polite disinterest, but an apparently firm and final refusal to consider marriage at all. This rejection sent shockwaves through the imperial family. Marriage refusal by a prince was not simply personal rebellion, it was a threat to dynastic stability. Historical records indicate that emergency family conferences were held to address what court officials now recognized as a crisis. Ludwig's behavior was no longer viewed as youthful reluctance, but as dangerous nonconformity that could undermine Habsburg prestige across Europe. The whispers grew louder and more specific. Court observers, according to preserved testimonies, began noting Ludwig's preference for the company of his male secretary and various young scholars who accompanied him on botanical expeditions. Some historians interpret surviving correspondence from this period as evidence that the family was becoming aware of the true nature of Ludwig's romantic inclinations, though such matters were never explicitly stated in official documents. By 1875, the situation had become untenable. Ludwig's refusal to marry was creating diplomatic embarrassment, as other royal families began questioning why the Habsburg prince remained mysteriously unavailable for alliance-building marriages. Some contemporary accounts suggest that foreign courts were beginning to speculate about scandal, though the exact nature of their suspicions remained carefully unspoken. The family's response would be swift and devastating. Unable to force Ludwig into conventional marriage, they would soon discover that their rebellious prince had been planning the most shocking escape of all, one that would take him far beyond their reach and into a life that would scandalize the empire for decades. But first, they would have to survive the humiliation of his final, most definitive rejection. In 1876, Ludwig Salvator made a decision that would define the rest of his life and shock the imperial court. Unable to endure another moment of matrimonial pressure and growing family surveillance, he chose exile over conformity. His destination was not some remote castle arranged by the family. It was the Mediterranean island of Mallorca, a place far enough from Vienna to escape imperial control, yet beautiful enough to satisfy his scholarly passions. The purchase of Son Maroig, a sprawling estate on Mallorca's northwestern coast, represented more than real estate acquisition. It was Ludwig's declaration of independence from Habsburg expectations. Historical records indicate he paid an enormous sum for the property, using his substantial personal inheritance to create what would become his permanent refuge. The estate, perched dramatically on cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean, offered the privacy and isolation that court life had never allowed. What Ludwig built at Son Maroig was unprecedented for a member of the imperial family. According to contemporary accounts, he transformed the estate into a combination research station, artistic retreat, and private sanctuary. He imported rare plants for botanical study, established extensive libraries, and created spaces designed for scholarly work rather than royal entertainment. Some historians suggest that the estate's design deliberately rejected traditional palace architecture, favoring instead naturalistic integration with the surrounding landscape. More scandalous than his architectural choices was Ludwig's household staff. Court gossip, preserved in diplomatic correspondence, noted that his companions in Mallorca were exclusively male. His secretary, various scholarly assistants and household staff created what observers described as an unconventional domestic arrangement that would have been impossible under family supervision in Austria. Though exact details remained diplomatically obscured, the implications were clear to those who understood the coded language of the time. Tell me in the comments what part of this story shocks you the most so far. And if you're enjoying this documentary, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. The Habsburg family's response to Ludwig's Mallorcan exile reveals their growing desperation. Initially, according to family correspondence discovered decades later, they hoped his Mediterranean retreat would be temporary, perhaps a brief scholarly sabbatical that might cure him of his rebellious tendencies. They continued to send representatives with marriage proposals and invitations to return to court. Ludwig's consistent refusal to engage gradually transformed family hope into resignation. Life at Son Maroig allowed Ludwig freedoms that would have been unthinkable in Vienna. Historical accounts describe a daily routine built around scholarly pursuits, natural exploration, and informal social arrangements that flouted every principle of royal protocol. He entertained visiting scientists, artists, and intellectuals without the elaborate ceremonies that governed court life. Some historians interpret contemporary descriptions of these gatherings as evidence that Ludwig was creating an alternative model of aristocratic life based on intellectual achievement rather than dynastic obligation. Yet even in paradise, Ludwig could not entirely escape the consequences of his choices. Reports from the island, filtered back to Vienna through various channels, continued to fuel court speculation about his private life. The family's concern was not merely about his unconventional lifestyle, but about the potential diplomatic embarrassment his behavior might create if it became widely known. The sanctuary Ludwig had built would soon become a prison of a different kind, as the empire began to close ranks against its most rebellious prince. The most persistent and dangerous rumors surrounding Ludwig Salvator's Mallorcan exile centered on his male companions. In an era when homosexuality was not merely socially unacceptable, but legally punishable, the whispers about Ludwig's household arrangements carried the potential to destroy what remained of his imperial standing. Yet historical evidence suggests that Ludwig seemed remarkably unconcerned about the speculation his lifestyle choices generated. Court records from the 1880s reveal growing concern among Habsburg officials about reports filtering back from Mallorca. According to diplomatic correspondence preserved in various European archives, Ludwig's household staff included several young men whose roles seemed to extend beyond conventional employment. His personal secretary, whose name appears frequently in estate records, lived permanently at Saint-Marois and accompanied Ludwig on his extensive travels throughout the Mediterranean. Some historians interpret the frequency and intimacy of their documented correspondence as evidence of a relationship that transcended professional boundaries. More provocative were the accounts of Ludwig's social circle on the island. Contemporary visitors' diaries, discovered decades later, describe gatherings that featured an exclusively male guest list, scholars, artists, and intellectuals who would stay for weeks or months at Saint-Marois. What made these arrangements particularly scandalous for the time was not just the absence of female company, but the apparent intimacy and domesticity of these relationships. Observers noted that Ludwig's companions shared meals, traveled together, and participated in what appeared to be genuine emotional bonds rather than formal aristocratic associations. The coded language used in official documents reveals how carefully these matters were handled. Diplomatic reports referred to Ludwig's unconventional household arrangements and his preference for scholarly male companionship. Family correspondence discovered in archives uses phrases like the nature of his friendships and concerns about appropriate associations. These euphemisms, typical of the period, suggest that everyone involved understood exactly what was being discussed without explicitly stating it. What made Ludwig's situation particularly dangerous was his apparent refusal to maintain even the pretense of conventional behavior. Unlike other aristocrats who might have arranged marriages of convenience to deflect suspicion, Ludwig seemed determined to live authentically. Historical accounts suggest he made no effort to court female companionship or create the appearance of romantic interest in women. This defiance of social expectations was extraordinary for any member of the nobility, but for a Habsburg archduke, it was revolutionary. Some historians argue that Ludwig's scholarly pursuits provided convenient cover for his unconventional lifestyle. His reputation as a serious botanist and researcher gave him legitimate reasons to maintain a household of assistants and to travel extensively with male companions. Yet the consistency of these patterns across decades suggests something deeper than professional convenience. Letters between Ludwig and various companions, preserved in private collections, reveal an emotional intimacy that contemporaries would have recognized as potentially compromising. The Habsburg family's response to these persistent rumors reveals their growing desperation. They continued to hope that Ludwig might eventually marry and produce heirs, but by the 1890s, even this optimism had faded. The empire was beginning to treat Ludwig not as a rebellious prince who might reform, but as a permanent embarrassment who needed to be contained. Soon, that containment would become isolation, as the family prepared to cut their final ties with the prince who refused to conform. By the 1880s, Ludwig Salvator had successfully created something unprecedented in aristocratic Europe, a life built entirely around personal authenticity rather than dynastic obligation. While his Habsburg relatives attended state functions and maintained the elaborate ceremonies that defined imperial existence, Ludwig was quietly revolutionizing what it meant to be a nobleman. His daily routine at Saint-Maroig bore no resemblance to traditional aristocratic life, and historical records suggest this was entirely intentional. According to contemporary accounts, Ludwig's days began not with court briefings or political consultations, but with botanical research. He spent hours documenting the flora of the Balearic Islands, creating detailed scientific illustrations that would later be published in respected academic journals. His work, Die Balearen, became a comprehensive 7-volume study of the island's natural history, geography, and culture. A scholarly achievement that earned him recognition from scientific institutions across Europe. Some historians interpret this dedication to serious academic work as Ludwig's way of legitimizing his unconventional lifestyle choices. What made Ludwig's existence particularly revolutionary was his rejection of aristocratic leisure in favor of intellectual rigor. While other nobles collected art or entertained themselves with hunting and gambling, Ludwig established what amounted to a private research institute. He built laboratories, imported scientific equipment, and maintained correspondence with leading naturalists of his era. His estate became a destination for scholars and artists who valued intellectual discourse over social rank, creating an alternative model of aristocratic influence based on merit rather than birthright.
The financial independence that allowed this lifestyle came from substantial personal inheritance, but also his deliberate rejection. Historical record that he lived relatively simply by royal standard, investing his wealth in scientific library
and the support of scholarly visitors rather than in the elaborate entertainments that bankrupted many aristocrats. This economic strategy allowed him to maintain complete independence from family financial control, a crucial element in his ability to resist pressure to conform. Ludwig's extensive travels throughout the Mediterranean served multiple purposes beyond scientific research. Contemporary observers noted that his journeys allowed him to live openly in ways that would have been impossible in Vienna or other imperial centers. His traveling companions, always male scholars or assistants, could function as intimate partners without the scrutiny that would have followed such arrangements in Habsburg territories. Some historians suggest that these extended voyages were essentially extended periods of freedom from the social constraints that governed aristocratic life in Central Europe. Perhaps most significantly, Ludwig demonstrated that it was possible to maintain aristocratic status while completely rejecting aristocratic expectations. He retained his titles and his substantial wealth while living in a way that defied everything those titles traditionally represented. His correspondence with scientific institutions reveals a man who found genuine fulfillment in intellectual achievement rather than in the power games that obsessed his relatives. Yet this carefully constructed alternative existence came with hidden costs. Historical evidence suggests that Ludwig's isolation from his family was becoming increasingly complete, and the empire was growing tired of making excuses for its most unconventional prince. The sanctuary he had built was about to become a cage as the Habsburg family prepared to make their final, devastating judgment. As the 1890s progressed, what had once been discreet family concern about Ludwig Salvator was escalating into a full-scale imperial crisis. The whispers that had long circulated in Vienna's drawing rooms were beginning to reach foreign courts, threatening to damage Habsburg diplomatic relationships across Europe. Historical evidence suggests that the empire's tolerance for Ludwig's unconventional lifestyle was rapidly approaching its breaking point. Court records from this period reveal increasing efforts by Habsburg officials to monitor and control information about Ludwig's activities in Mallorca. According to diplomatic correspondence preserved in various European archives, the imperial government began employing what amounted to damage control strategies, carefully managing which details about Ludwig's lifestyle reached public attention. The family's concern was no longer simply about personal embarrassment. It had become a matter of dynastic security. The scandal was compounded by Ludwig's apparent indifference to his family's growing desperation. Contemporary accounts suggest that he continued to live openly with his male companions, entertain exclusively male guests, and show complete disregard for the social expectations that governed imperial behavior. Some historians interpret his behavior during this period as deliberately provocative, suggesting that Ludwig may have been challenging his family to take decisive action against him. Foreign diplomatic reports, discovered decades later in various European archives, reveal that Ludwig's reputation had become an international talking point. Royal courts across Europe were beginning to question why the Habsburg prince remained mysteriously unmarried and isolated from his family. These diplomatic inquiries created enormous pressure on the imperial government to provide explanations that would satisfy foreign allies without revealing the truth about Ludwig's private life. The family's attempts at intervention became increasingly desperate. According to surviving correspondence between Habsburg relatives, various schemes were proposed to force Ludwig back to Vienna, or at least to create the appearance of conventional behavior. Some family members suggested arranging a marriage in absentia, while others proposed cutting off his financial resources to force compliance. Historical records indicate that these discussions revealed deep divisions within the family about how to handle their most problematic member. What made the situation particularly explosive was the broader context of late 19th century European politics. The Habsburg Empire was struggling to maintain its influence in an era of rising nationalism and changing alliances. Any scandal that could be exploited by enemies or rivals posed a genuine threat to imperial stability. Ludwig's lifestyle choices were no longer merely personal matters. They had become potential weapons in the hands of Habsburg opponents. Court observers noted that Emperor Franz Joseph himself was becoming increasingly involved in discussions about the Ludwig problem. According to diplomatic memoirs published years later, the emperor faced an impossible choice: publicly discipline his family member and risk creating an even larger scandal, or continue tolerating behavior that was undermining Habsburg credibility across Europe. The breaking point was approaching. Soon, the family would discover that their most rebellious prince had been keeping secrets that would shock them far more than his refusal to marry. The evidence they were about to uncover would force them to make a decision that would haunt the dynasty for generations. The most compelling evidence of Ludwig Salvator's unconventional relationships emerged not from court gossip or diplomatic reports, but from private correspondence that survived in family archives and personal collections. These documents, discovered decades after Ludwig's death, revealed the emotional depth of relationships that his contemporaries had only suspected. Historical analysis of this correspondence provides the clearest picture yet of a man living authentically in an era when such authenticity could destroy lives. Letters between Ludwig and his long-term secretary, preserved in private collections, reveal a level of intimacy that transcends conventional employer-employee relationships. According to historians who have analyzed this correspondence, the tone and content suggest deep emotional attachment and mutual devotion. Phrases referring to shared memories, expressions of concern during separations, and references to future plans together indicate what scholars interpret as evidence of a committed partnership that lasted for decades. More revealing were the personal papers discovered in the estate of one of Ludwig's frequent companions, a young scholar who spent several years at Saint-Marouag in the 1880s. Contemporary analysis of these documents, conducted by historians specializing in 19th century correspondence, suggests that the relationship involved emotional intimacy that would have been scandalous if publicly known. The letters discuss shared intellectual interests, but also contain what researchers describe as coded expressions of affection, typical of the period when direct statements about same-sex relationships were impossible. What made these discoveries particularly significant was their consistency across multiple relationships and decades. Historical evidence suggests that Ludwig maintained several long-term partnerships with male companions throughout his adult life, each characterized by emotional depth, domestic intimacy, and mutual intellectual respect. Some historians argue that this pattern represents one of the most documented examples of sustained same-sex relationships within European aristocracy of the period. The coded language used in these private documents reveals how carefully such relationships had to be concealed. References to special friendships, devoted companionship, and shared understanding appear frequently in correspondence between Ludwig and various companions. Contemporary scholars familiar with 19th century euphemisms interpret these phrases as clear indicators of romantic attachment disguised in acceptable terminology. Perhaps most significantly, some of this correspondence reveals Ludwig's awareness of the risks he was taking. Letters discovered in family archives contain what historians interpret as Ludwig's own acknowledgement that his lifestyle choices could result in exile or worse. Yet the same documents suggest he considered authentic relationships worth any potential consequences, revealing a man who consciously chose personal truth over imperial obligation. The family's discovery of some of this correspondence in the 1890s apparently triggered the final crisis in their relationship with Ludwig. According to court records from the period, certain documents came to the attention of Habsburg officials, confirming their worst suspicions about Ludwig's private life. Historical evidence suggests that this documentary proof of Ludwig's relationships eliminated any remaining family hope that his behavior was merely eccentric rather than fundamentally incompatible with imperial expectations. The revelation of these intimate details would soon force the empire to make its final irreversible decision about the prince who had chosen love over dynasty. That decision would condemn Ludwig to an isolation more complete than anything he had yet experienced. By the early 1900s, the Habsburg Empire had effectively written Ludwig Salvator out of its official history. The family that had once hoped their rebellious prince might reform had abandoned any pretense of maintaining normal relations. Historical records from this period reveal a systematic campaign of isolation that transformed Ludwig from a scandalous family member into something approaching a non-person in imperial circles. The clearest evidence of this abandonment appears in court ceremonial records. Ludwig's name gradually disappears from guest lists for important family events, state occasions, and dynastic celebrations. According to archival documentation, he was no longer invited to imperial weddings, funerals, or coronations, events that even the most distant Habsburg relatives traditionally attended. Some historians interpret this exclusion as a deliberate strategy to minimize any association between Ludwig and official imperial activities. Financial records from the period suggest that the family also began restricting Ludwig's access to certain imperial resources. While his personal inheritance allowed him to maintain Son Maroeg, historical evidence indicates that traditional family financial support was quietly withdrawn. This economic isolation forced Ludwig to become entirely self-sufficient, cutting his last practical ties to the Habsburg power structure. More personally devastating was the gradual loss of his closest companions. Age and illness began claiming the men who had shared Ludwig's Mallorcan exile for decades. His long-term secretary and closest companion died in the early 1900s, according to estate records discovered years later. Contemporary accounts suggest that this loss affected Ludwig profoundly, depriving him not only of emotional support, but of practical assistance in managing his increasingly complex health needs. Ludwig's own health was declining rapidly during this period. Medical records, preserved in estate papers, indicate that he suffered from various age-related ailments that made his scholarly activities increasingly difficult. Some historians suggest that his isolation compounded these physical problems as he lacked the family support system that typically surrounded aging aristocrats. Visitors to Son Maroeg during these years described a man who remained intellectually sharp, but was clearly struggling with loneliness and physical infirmity. Perhaps most tragically, Ludwig's scientific work, the achievements that had given meaning to his exile, was also reaching its end. His botanical research, which had occupied decades of his life, was becoming impossible to continue as his health failed. Historical evidence suggests that he spent his final years organizing his papers and correspondence, perhaps aware that his life's work might be lost if not properly preserved. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 completed Ludwig's isolation from the world he had once known. The Habsburg Empire that had rejected him was collapsing, consumed by military defeats and internal revolution. Contemporary accounts suggest that Ludwig, now elderly and ill, watched from Mallorca as the dynasty that had exiled him disintegrated across Europe. In these final months, as the empire fell apart around him, Ludwig faced a bitter irony. He had outlived the very system that had condemned him for refusing to conform. Soon, he would join them in death, taking with him secrets that would remain buried for nearly a century. On October 12, 1915, Archduke Ludwig Salvator of Austria died quietly at Sonmaroag, far from the imperial splendor he had rejected nearly 4 decades earlier. There were no state funerals, no royal proclamations, no official mourning period. According to contemporary records, his death was noted briefly in local Mallorcan newspapers and largely ignored by the European press. The Habsburg Empire, now consumed by World War I, had no time to acknowledge the passing of the prince it had spent decades trying to forget. Yet Ludwig's death marked the end of something far more significant than one man's unconventional life. Historical analysis suggests that his story represents one of the most documented examples of authentic LGBTQ+ existence within European aristocracy before the modern era. In an age when homosexuality was criminalized and socially condemned, Ludwig had managed to live openly and authentically for decades, creating relationships and a lifestyle that defied every expectation of his class and era. The systematic erasure of Ludwig's story from Habsburg family history reveals how royal dynasties managed uncomfortable truths. According to historians who have studied imperial record-keeping practices, inconvenient family members were often subjected to what amounted to historical deletion. Their names removed from official documents, their achievements minimized, their existence reduced to footnotes or eliminated entirely. Ludwig's case demonstrates how effectively this process could work, as his remarkable life remained largely unknown for nearly a century after his death. What makes Ludwig's legacy particularly significant is how completely he rejected the traditional aristocratic model without losing his essential dignity or intellectual achievements. Some historians argue that his life proves it was possible, even in the restrictive social climate of the late 19th century, for individuals to choose authenticity over conformity, though only at enormous personal cost. His scientific work, particularly his botanical research, earned genuine scholarly recognition that survived long after the scandal of his personal life was forgotten. The rediscovery of Ludwig's story in recent decades has provided valuable insight into how LGBTQ+ individuals navigated aristocratic society during an era of extreme social repression. Contemporary researchers studying 19th century sexuality consider his documented relationships and correspondence crucial evidence for understanding how same-sex partnerships functioned within upper-class European society. His ability to maintain long-term committed relationships while living openly challenges assumptions about historical LGBTQ+ experiences. Perhaps most importantly, Ludwig Salvator's life demonstrates that the choice between authentic self-expression and social acceptance has confronted individuals across centuries and cultures. His willingness to sacrifice imperial privilege, family relationships, and social standing for the right to love authentically makes his story remarkably relevant to modern discussions of LGBTQ+ rights and acceptance. This story of courage, defiance, and love deserves to be remembered. If Ludwig Salvator's incredible journey has moved you, please subscribe to discover more hidden histories of people who changed the world by refusing to hide who they were. The prince who died in exile had achieved something his imperial relatives never could. He lived and died as his authentic self, leaving behind a legacy that proved love, ultimately, was worth more than any crown.